Okay, good evening, eager beavers, and people with nothing better to do with the time. This episode's aimed specifically at the latter. Right, couple of warnings before we get started. Firstly, this episode is just going to be me talking bollocks for Christ knows how long, an hour, 2 hours, I don't know how long we're going to go. So I recommend you either listen to this in bed when you can't get to sleep and you need something to bore you to death, or just skip it altogether. And yeah, I'm not genuinely, I'm not being self-deprecating. Might want to skip this one. However, if you have any interest in prostitution, taking drugs and making bad decisions, you'll love it. Secondly, if you've been listening to this podcast on a regular basis, you may have noticed a slight contrast between the way I speak during my introductions and the way I speak to guests. So yeah, when I'm talking to guests, I kind of slip into a similar mode of politeness as when I meet someone's grandma, like I try to watch my P's and Q's. But I grew up a chav knocking about with kids who rob mopeds and smoke squidgy black on council estates in South Manchester, where you tend to develop a rather colourful, albeit unsophisticated lexicon. So let's just say it's in my DNA to play a bit fast and loose with the Queen's English. And yeah, this episode's very personal. So in order for me to be as authentic as possible, I can't be stuck in my head trying to be all sensorial and trying to stay one step ahead of myself. So I'm afraid you're just going to have to put up with a little bit more effing and jeffing than usual, because that's just the way I speak. So what's this episode about exactly? Well, as we established last episode, I've been doing this for about a year now, and I always said I was going to give it a year, see where we were at, and then make a decision as to whether or not I felt like it was worth continuing, or to, just drop it and move on to something else. And I've been very much in two minds about it. So, I mean, for one, it takes up a lot of time, even just one episode a week, researching, recording, editing, show notes, all that. And yeah, I won't piss and moan about how busy my life is. We're all busy. Everyone's got shit going on, but it's a factor. And the other thing is, it costs quite a lot of money to run, like more than you'd think, more than I planned for anyway. And again, tough shit to me. Nobody forced me to do it. It was my decision. But the main reason these two factors are bothering me is that the podcast hasn't been growing as much as I hoped it would. Not that I expected millions of listeners in the space of a year. I don't think you can anticipate millions of listeners to a podcast of this nature, no matter how long you do it. But to invest time and money in something that doesn't feel like it's progressing is just, it's disheartening, okay? And I've sort of been mulling over why I feel it's stagnating. And it's not that the content isn't good, because it is. I'm confident that the information I'm putting out there is top notch, and I think I'm a pretty good interviewer. And so I was wondering, maybe it's a marketing thing. I haven't got a clue about all that shit, and I'm probably just being a bit impatient as well. And these are all factors, probably. But I think the real reason it hasn't connected in the way I hoped it would is because I haven't stayed true to the original vision for this project. So when I originally conceived of this idea, it was always supposed to be this sort of bifurcated approach where, on the one hand, you've got me kind of sharing my subjective experiences by writing blog posts about it, and then supplementing that with the objective clinical advice from experts in the podcast. And I've been pumping out podcast episodes, no problem, but I've started to become very conscious of the fact that I've not been holding up the other side of the deal. So far, I've only published 2 blog posts, neither of which is particularly confessional. So yeah, despite heralding myself as somebody with lived experience, I haven't really been backing up that claim very well. I have kind of thrown my 2 cents in here and there during interviews and stuff, but I've not been anywhere near as candid as I intended, and certainly not as candid as I feel would be relatable or helpful to you guys. Also, this might be something only a marketer might notice, but if you look on the website, the Facebook page, it's all very business-like, very impersonal. My own worst enemy appears more like a brand or a company than a person. And I think I've kind of been hiding behind that to some extent. I think I've inadvertently referred to this project as we or us a couple of times, and there is no we or us, it's just me. And part of this is I've just never been a person that wanted to be noticed. And we'll get into all this a bit more later, but I'm quite happy fading into the background and being ignored, which, you know, isn't the best marketing strategy, let's just say. Also, I ain't got the face for it, right? Marketing nowadays is all social media, things like YouTube and Instagram, which is just full of the young and the beautiful, especially in the mental health realm. It seems like 90% of the bloggers and content makers in mental health are like these young, pretty psychology students who are like 21. I'm fucking 35, going bald with a big ass beard, look like some sort of candid waxworker Brian Blessed. Yeah? I can't compete with them for clicks. So that's a factor. I think there's a bit of an inferiority complex going on as well. Like there's already plenty of established mental health campaigners out there, way more skilled and engaging than I am at this kind of thing, and people that have suffered way more than I have, whose stories way more inspiring, and who've had to fight harder than I have to get out of it. But I think mainly what's holding me back is feeling like I don't know if I want to be the mental health guy. Like that's going to become my thing. Like right now, this podcast is still small enough that I could walk away from it and no one would care, no one would remember me, and I could pretend like it never happened. But if I keep pressing on, I risk becoming the guy who's known for just being fucked in the head. Like, not the guy who's talented at anything or who's achieved something, just a guy that fell to pieces once and is like taking it upon himself to be shameless enough to talk about it. And I'm not sure I'm entirely comfortable with that. You know, who dreams of being that guy? The problem is, when I think about quitting, like, did you ever leave home as a kid? Like, you're about 7 years old, your mum's banned you off the computer for being a lippy twat or whatever, and you're like, right, I'm leaving. And you mean that shit, like you pack your little bag and you stomp downstairs, slam the door behind you, but then like halfway up the street, you're like, well now what, where are you going to go? Grandma's house, brilliant. And that's sort of like me with this. If I knock this on the head, like what else am I going to do? Because as you're about to learn, I'm 35 years old with half an education, no qualifications, no marketable skills, no real experience in anything resembling a proper job. So it's like, what else am I going to do? And I'll talk a bit more about this in a bit, but the last normal job I had was working as a handyman for a rich couple who lived in this big fuck-off mansion, yeah? But the bulk of my responsibility was picking up dog shit, yeah? Genuinely. They had like 7 dogs. My job was to keep the garden a dog shit-free zone, yeah? The only job I've ever done that I was any good at is working as a driver for escort agencies, chaperoning prostitutes around Manchester. Did that for 10 years on and off. And yeah, when you're 21, awesome. When you're 30 odd with kids, tragic. So yeah, bar those things, menial labour and the sex industry, which I don't ever want to go back to either, it's like, fuck, the only thing I'm qualified to do is be a fucking professional agoraphobic, and that's pathetic. So I've been sort of trapped in this limbo for a while now where I'm thinking if I walk away from this now, I have to live with the fact that I didn't put my all into it. Like, you know, I half-assed it. But I don't know if I want to put my all into it, because last time I tried that, I got my fingers burned. And again, we'll go into all this soon, but when I was 23, started a business, put my all into it, and went bankrupt at 25. And I've never forgiven myself for it, and that's why I think I'm all fucked up now. But here's the thing. My little boy's 7 now, just turned 7. And I've got a little girl as well, she's like 7 months. And I've always tried to instill these little maxims of success in him. You know, like you can be anything you want to be if you're willing to work hard for it. You know, be courageous, try new things, don't spend time worrying about what the people think of you. But the problem with that is, like when I was running my business, right, it's a bar, nightclub business, I used to get these jobless pissheads come in, sit there giving me business advice, like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. And I was always like, I'm not being funny, right, but if I'm going to take business advice, I'll take it from a successful bar owner, not a work-shy pisshead. But the same applies to me. Like, I can't expect my son to internalise these concepts if they just exist in his mind as abstract platitudes. Because if I keep jumping about between dead-end jobs and then telling my kids that you can be anything you want to be, they're eventually going to say, well then, why are you a fucking loser? If that's true, why didn't you be courageous? Why did you spend so much time worrying what other people think of you? Like one of these fucking self-help gurus who still lives at home with his mum at 35. What do you know? And there's something of the pageant mum about it as well. Like trying to turn your kids into the thing that you wish you could have been. Like sort of leading from behind, cracking a whip, And it's not good enough. I think if you want the best for your kids, you can't just preach advice. You have to set a good example for them. You have to be the personification of your own wise words. And I can't help but think that if you grow up with parents telling you shit like the world's your oyster, but they don't live by that maxim themselves, what does that teach you? That it's okay to not practice what you preach, or that what you preach isn't actually worth practicing? Because if it is, then why haven't you? Or maybe it just teaches them that their world is a small world. Like, yeah, the world's your oyster, but this is all it consists of. Like some fucking guy who runs a little family business as a barnyard masturbator, wanking pigs off for a living, saying to his kids, like, one day, son, this'll all be yours. By the way, that's an actual profession. I haven't just made that up. And I think mostly, though, it just teaches your kids that, well, it's a lie. Or not a lie, a myth. Like Atlantis. Like, you're sort of saying that there's this paradise out there somewhere. You've never been there, though. You don't know where it is. You've just heard about it. Hearsay. And you're expecting your kid to just jump in a little raft and set sail for it with no idea how to actually get there, or whether there's even anything to get to in the first place. And, you know, of course, there's every chance that you can be the worst parent in the world and your kids will still grow up to be happy, healthy, successful, and, you know, without any of your bullshit holding them back. But I don't know, man, when you look at things like intergenerational poverty in certain demographics, there's a certain inherited mentality there that's as much to blame as external factors. Like what I grew up in, we weren't going to go to university back in the 90s. That was what rich kids and like super smart kids did, not us. We were just going to go work in a factory or whatever. And I think part of me is still tethered to that attitude unconsciously. Like, there's some sort of glass ceiling that separates me from those who are actually capable of being more than they already are. But there is no glass ceiling, you know, there's just you not willing to risk the climb. So, yeah, this is me getting back on the fucking ladder, I suppose. The obvious problem with this is, you know, I'm sat here making this big declaration like, you know, this time I'm going to do it right. But that don't mean shit. You know, I could still fail. This could all still turn out to be a complete waste of time. And then what? But I think at least I can be an example to my children that I was a doer, not just a talker. And if that's the only thing I can teach them, that's a pretty fucking valuable example to set, I think. So, yeah. So, now what? Okay. Well, firstly, I've got a stack of blog posts that are sort of half written all about my lived experience with being fucked in the head. You know, what happened to me, why it happened, how it happened, what I should have done, how I fixed myself up, what I learned. A whole bunch of shit that can hopefully help some of you guys either avoid the same fate or at least help you navigate your way through it if you're already in it. So I'm going to start sharing those and writing more. I've got quite a lot to say about all this mental health bullshit as well. Not all of it falls in line with popular opinion. I guess another thing that's been holding me back, worrying I might say the wrong thing and ruin my chances entering this space before I've even started or whatever. But, you know, fuck it. Honesty's more important than approval, I guess. The podcast is going to stay the podcast. However, I'm about to start studying with the Open University, doing an honours degree in philosophy and psychology. And as much as I enjoy mental health in the narrow sense, my heart is in psychology in a much broader sense. So I will be expanding the range of topics that I'm covering. But it will always be with one eye firmly on the practical aspects of psychology and philosophy. Like, you know, how we can evolve and improve ourselves. So don't worry, we won't be debating how many angels can dance on the head of a pin or any of that bollocks. But I will be exploring things like, you know, love, sex, relationships, work, ambition, fear, hatred, revenge, fame, death, you name it. Even like productivity issues and stuff like that, nutrition, exercise, just anything and everything that can help you sort yourself out and better understand yourself. Because there's more to this mental health flag than just fucking CBT and medication, you know? We're more complex than that. So, also, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. There's already a channel up there where I sort of upload the audio from the podcasts, but I'm going to start video recording as many of my interviews as possible. And I said I was going to do this back in January, but I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready in my own head, and I wasn't ready equipment-wise. But yeah, thanks to a couple of generous donations from a couple of listeners, I've managed to buy a decent webcam now. So also, I'm just going to upload video versions of the blog post as well, because I know a lot of you lazy fuckers can't be arsed reading. So yeah, just another way to reach more people. So yeah, I'm going all in, see what comes of it. However, before we get to all that, firstly, I need to burn some bridges with my own self-consciousness. And that's what the rest of this episode is about. So, like I say, I've thrown the odd vague anecdote into these interviews here and there, but not enough that anyone could piece anything together and figure out exactly what my story is. You know, I've talked about depression, anxiety, agoraphobia, panic disorder, and I bet some of you must be listening to this thinking, fucking hell, hang on a minute, which is it? So, yeah, today I'm going to tell you all about me. Right from the very beginning, right the way up till I hit rock bottom. Not everything, just the episodes which I think made a significant contribution to my psychological development and then my eventual psychological breakdown. So I don't know if this will be of any interest to you. You know, maybe you'll be able to draw some parallels with your own journey. Maybe it'll help you avoid making some of the same mistakes I did. But like I say, I'm mostly doing this for me to sort of slay the dragon of worrying what people think of me. Saying that, I bet self-consciousness is more like a fucking hydra than a dragon, but I don't know. If I can chop one of the heads off, it's a start, innit? So, yeah, feels a bit weird, this, introducing myself. And don't worry, I'm not going to actually interview myself. I did actually toy with the idea of doing this like an interview. Like, I thought it'd be sort of brilliantly facetious, but couldn't be asked. Too much like hard work editing all that together. So I'm afraid it's just going to be me yammering away for God knows how long. So, as I always say, please enjoy my conversation with me. Right, so, born 1982. Jesus, all the way back. Don't worry, it's relevant. I was adopted at birth. My mum and dad told me this pretty much as soon as I was old enough to understand. But it wasn't until later on, when I learned about the circumstances around it, that it kind of fucked with my head a little bit. So we'll just leave that to one side for now. My earliest memory of anything I feel affected me psychologically, I think it's about, I don't know, maybe 6 years old. And my mum used to get a haircut at home, one of these like mobile hairdressers, a woman called Susan. And yeah, my mum's getting her haircut, and I remember sort of playing on the floor nearby. And yeah, this woman starts telling my mum about our son's had got meningitis at university, and he was like 21, and he nearly died from it. And I said, I don't remember the exact conversation, but what I picked up from it were two things which were like a terrifying revelation to my little naive 6-year-old brain. One, you could get gravely ill out of the blue, and two, you could die early. You didn't have to be old. So, you know, 6 years old, you haven't really got any sort of concept of illness and death. So this proper put the shits up me. So obviously I wanted to be able to preempt anything from happening to me. So I started to read this big book my mum had on a bookshelf, which was like an A to Z of illnesses with like a symptom checker in there. And I just became fascinated with germs and parasites and diseases and cancer. And yeah, I just used to spend hours flicking through this book at like 6 years old. And apparently for like years afterwards, my mum said I'd like constantly come running to her complaining about various symptoms and aches and pains and worried I was ill and stuff. And also a little bit later on, I remember having a touch of emetophobia, which is like a fear of vomiting. Yeah, I think it was about 10 or 11 or something. And I'd always try to avoid staying over at friends' houses. But when I did, like I'd never eat anything, or what I'd do is I'd wait till they fell asleep and then sneak home at like 2 o'clock in the morning because I was scared of being sick at their house. And yeah, I'd somehow managed to associate being away from home with like a risk of contamination and getting ill. And I haven't quite figured out the root of that one, but there's interesting parallels there with agoraphobia, I think. Anyway, so I think I sort of grew out of that for a few years. Then as a teenager, a couple of things happened. So firstly, I got the documents about my adoption and all that, and come to find out that the girl that gave birth to me, she was like a teenager, something like 16 when she got pregnant with me, and the guy was in his mid-20s. And I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, like Leanne was 18 when I met her, and I was like just turned 24, but 16, I don't know. I've always pictured him as being a bit of a fucking weirdo, to be honest, probably conceived under a fucking railway bridge or something, because there's no way this relationship was out in the open. So, yeah, nice to know I've possessed those genetics. Anyway, pure speculation this, but when you get adopted, the usual story is, you know, your birth mummy wasn't able to look after you, so she gave you away to a family that could. And I remember thinking, there's no fucking way a teenager in the 80s got pregnant, realised it was probably a bad idea, but then decided to keep it and then just hand the baby over to a family that couldn't have kids, right? Now, whether she wanted rid of me herself or her parents wanted rid of me, it makes much more sense, probably much less traumatic to just get an abortion. So I couldn't help but think they probably tried to have my skull crushed and my brains sucked out, but they must have just been too late, like I'd already passed the legal limit. And that kind of fucked me up. Like, I don't know, nowadays, I think of it more like dodging a bullet, because, I mean, the statistical likelihood of any of us being here is vanishingly small. What is it, something like 200, 300 million sperm cells per ejaculation, right? The odds of winning that race, 200, 300 million to 1. And even the planned babies, you know, there's every chance your dad could have accidentally slipped out at the last minute during the vital thrust when he was getting a bit excited and skeeted you up the wall. So for me, it's like, they shouldn't have been doing that in the first place, but they did. Should have worn protection, but didn't. Should have got the morning after pill, but didn't. Should have gone to the abortion clinic earlier, but didn't. Could have tried some gin and knitting needle DIY bullshit, but didn't. And then could have given birth to me in a fucking toilet somewhere, smothered me and dumped me in a wheelie bin, but didn't. So, yeah, nowadays it just makes me like more appreciative to be here. But back then, it kind of made me feel like, I don't know, not just like an accident, but a bit of a reject. Especially because it's a bit fucked up to frame it like this, but when it comes to couples who can't have kids, yeah, and that was a situation with my parents, people always frame adoption like there was some cosmic rebalancing taking place, like it was meant to be. The universe delivered the unexpected baby to the infertile parents by way of a generous conduit. And I don't know, maybe that's what the stork represents in all these fairy stories, statutory rape pregnancies. But yeah, the truth is, if you were adopted because your parents couldn't have kids, you're a last resort, yeah? And that fucks with your head when you're a teenager and you're all existential and angsty and stuff. And, I mean, you know, truth is, it don't matter how you and your parents came together, just that you did come together, especially when it works out. You know, I certainly didn't get treated like a last resort. I had an amazing childhood. And I've met other people who were adopted who wound up having a fucking shocking upbringing where it seemed pretty apparent that not having that biological connection did matter and the parents couldn't get past it and wound up treating them like shit and neglecting them and didn't love them like one of their own. But I didn't get that. You know, me and my parents are tight. Tighter than some of you blood-connected motherfuckers, let me tell you. I'm constantly shocked by some of the politics I see within some families. And yeah, makes me grateful that I was given up for adoption, because I can't help but suspect if, you know, whatever the dynamic was in which I was conceived, it'd have been a fucking disaster if they'd have kept me around. So, yeah, put it this way, I never had any desire to find out anything about my history or make contact with anyone. So, when my mum gave me all the documents when I was about 15, I remember sort of looking at the basics, like names and ages, and just realised immediately that I didn't care. I didn't feel anything, didn't have a shred of curiosity, so I didn't even look at the rest of the stuff, I just burned it. So I don't know, like I say, I think I've reconciled it now. I think I've got a more mature, measured perspective on it. But there was a time there where I very much felt like the odd man out, you know, like very much like me against the world. And I sometimes wonder whether, like, the legacy of that might go some way to explaining why I'm so much of a, like, fucking social rattlesnake now. You know, I don't go out, I don't have any friends, not really, not proper friends. and I don't want any, and I don't have any desire to make any friends. We'll get to all that. Anyway, the other thing which grew out of this whole episode was cottoning on to the idea of genetic illness, cancer specifically. We're getting obsessed with cancer. Because I'm adopted, I didn't know my family medical history. And at some point, don't know when, can't remember, I'd heard that like the age group most at risk for testicular cancer was like between 15 and 35. So as soon as I hit 15, I'm on it, start prodding around, convinced I've got something, go to the doctors, get the all clear, but what the fuck does he know? He's probably missed something. So I took to like checking myself all the time, checking and rechecking every single day. Whenever I wasn't preoccupied with something, my mind would turn inwards and I'd start speculating about disease and trying to seek out some kind of odd sensation or aches and pains. And, thus began the hypochondria. And ever since then, I think I must have diagnosed myself with some sort of cancer at least once a year. Interestingly though, at the time, it never actually sort of spilled over into full-blown anxiety or depression. I think the repeat visits to the doctor, even though they didn't reassure me completely, I think they must have reassured me enough that it didn't take over my life. And I think part of the reason for that as well is just how busy and scatty life is when you're a teenager in high school. You barely get a chance to be overly introspective. Now, when it comes to high school, you'd think high school would be this sort of bottomless repository of psychological significance, but for me, it just wasn't. Like, I've got plenty of memories from high school, but nothing of any significance. Like, I wasn't bullied, it wasn't particularly stressful, I don't think. For the most part, it was just a typical teenage experience. Lots of insecurity, trying to impress people, wanting to be accepted, but nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't meet anybody who had any particular impact on me, no one who taught me anything, and I've gone over and over this in my mind, and there's really only 3 experiences which I think could pass as being in any way formative, in a way that sort of echoed down the years. So, first 3 years, it all went pretty well. I behaved, I did my homework, got the odd detention, nothing serious. And I wasn't a great student, I wasn't bad either, I was doing all right. I think it first started to sort of go to shit when it came to seeing, I think they're called like the careers officer. And I don't know if it's the same now, but you used to get the chance to like choose subjects to specialise in. And at the time, I wanted to be an aircraft engineer. I don't know why, don't know where that came from. I just fancied working on engines. And it felt unrealistic because I knew it meant going to uni and that wasn't something we did. But I still liked the idea, Anyway, I remember telling this to the careers officer and she just sort of went, you have to go to university to be an engineer. And then she said something about my grades not being good enough. And then she said, have you thought about doing anything else? And the implication was obviously, you ain't going to be an engineer, so aim lower. And it just felt like the one thing I wanted to do, I can't do. And I didn't want to do anything else. So forget it. So I think I ended up choosing like art and history. Art because it was basically 45 minutes of piss farting about. I don't know why I chose history. I had to choose something, I suppose. But that just cemented this idea that school was pointless for people like me, just biding my time until I left school and got a job in a factory or whatever. So I just stopped caring, got to a point where I didn't even take a fucking bag or any books into school. I just used to turn up to class with a pen, did my work on like a sheet of paper, which I inevitably lost or just chucked in the bin afterwards. And yeah, so that affected me. I remember it wasn't even like, your grades aren't very good, so if you want to be an engineer, you're really going to have to step it up a gear. It was just like, nah, motherfucker, you ain't going to university, forget it. So, quick art anecdote, right? This is brilliant. So, there was, in art class, there was like a competition between all the schools in like South Manchester or whatever to submit a piece of art to Stockport Art Gallery, and then a couple of pictures from each school would get chosen to be put on display. And yeah, I remember I read about this painter called Piet Mondrian, something like that. One of these abstract artists, and basically you'll have seen him, right? It's like these grid paintings, like black lines, like a grid, and then he'd colour the odd square in a different colour. fucking rubbish, right? And there's all this commentary about how he's breaking free from the constraints of visual reality and thrusting out into the world of abstraction, and that it was all about, you know, geometric discipline and representative of the angularity of urban development. And I remember thinking, fuck off. Like, this is what we're getting away with, is it? Right? So I took a piece of paper, yeah? I drew some squares and some circles and some triangles on it, and then I coloured them in different colours, and I called it Shapes and Colours. And I was being lazy and sarcastic. And guess what? It got picked and displayed in a fucking art exhibition. That summed up modern art for me. I ain't got time for it. So, anyway, that's beside the point. Second thing that happened of any significance was getting myself a girlfriend and losing my virginity. Okay, so why is popping your cherry so significant? Okay, where to start with this? Right, so 3 most popular girls in school: Lucy, Rachel, Hannah. Lucy, she's like tall, slim, long legs, all that. Rachel, she was like thick, dark hair, gorgeous face, but like quite standoffish, quite intimidating. Then there was Hannah, okay? And Hannah she was curvy before curvy was a thing. I mean, it's always been a thing for me. Just boobs and thighs and hips and just ridiculous, yeah? And she had a husky voice, but she was dead nice as well. And I thought she was a goddess. Like, I was in love with this girl. And usually with the prettiest girl in the school, the typical experience, remembering that, you know, I'm not one of the tough kids, I'm not popular, anything like that. The usual experience for guys like me is you just sort of admire her from afar and you've got no chance. She doesn't even acknowledge your existence, yeah? But that's not what happened with me. By some bizarre twist of fate, she wound up liking me back. But I was shit to death of her. So we were around at this guy's house one evening, and he shoved us in his bedroom together to get us to kiss each other or whatever. But I couldn't do it. I didn't want to fuck it up and do a bad job, so I bottled it. And yeah, ultimately, nothing ever came of it, and I missed my opportunity. And then a few weeks later, she starts seeing a lad called John Jameson or something like that. And they're still together to this day, as far as I know, like married with kids and all that. So good job I bottled it, really. Otherwise, their children wouldn't exist. Anyway, so that was a massive confidence boost for me. One of the most popular, fittest, that was the word back then, fittest girls in the school was into me. So I suddenly fancied my chances with the opposite sex a bit more then. So that summer, 1998, the summer before the last year of high school, I meet this other girl, Lucy. So the way I think I met Lucy was, me and a couple of mates had decided to start a band or whatever. Me on the guitar, another guy, Chris, we'll give him a name because he comes up again later. He was the drummer, and then we had another lad singing. So we used to rehearse in my mum and dad's garage, and it sort of turned into this little hub where people, friends of friends, would just turn up and we'd all hang out together. And one of the singer's mates turns up with a couple of blondes he knew from down his end, Lucy and Gemma. Now, if Hannah was beautiful, Lucy was like porn star sexy. Not better, just different. And she wasn't a virgin either, by any stretch, which made her all the more desirable back then. And but we fucking hated each other at first. I think the reason I hated her was because she started bashing the singer behind his girlfriend's back. And I was good mates with his girlfriend, but I was mates with him as well. So the only person I could be pissed off at was her, I suppose. I was probably a bit jealous as well. And, but God, it was really vitriolic. We really cussed each other out and stuff. I think she's the first girl I ever called a cunt to her face. And probably the last as well, actually. And I don't know how we turned things around. I think me and her just kind of got stuck together a couple of times at the singer's house when he was off trying to be a boyfriend to his actual missus. And yeah, somehow we just sort of made amends. And I don't know, I honestly can't remember. But put it this way, it didn't start the conventional way. You know, instead of a bit of kissing and a date and hand-holding, right? One night, we sat talking in my parents' garage, chatting, flirting. And bearing in mind, there's a bunch of other people there, fast asleep in sleeping bags on the floor. She just stands up, strips ass naked and pounced on me. Fucking shit myself, right? Bear in mind, I've never done anything like this with a girl before. Maybe sort of hovered halfway between first and second base, yeah? She whips it out, tries getting me to stand to attention, got no chance, right? Imagine being expected to lose your virginity like that with an audience of 5 people. So that was a disaster, and she wasn't impressed either. But after what happened with Hannah, I was like, nah, man, like this one ain't getting away. So, I don't know if I should tell this. I think I can, because I remember it was a big mission of mine back then to lose my virginity before I was 16, but I never managed it. So, I'm pretty sure we were of legal age. Bollocks to it. So anyway, a couple of days later, I invite her around to the garage, skipped first and second base, right? Whipped her knickers off, dived in face first, yeah? Straight to third base, no messing, right? I remember Oasis, Don't Look Back in Anger, was playing in the background on the radio. I finished the job before the second chorus started. Yeah, have some of that. So I redeemed myself, got a second bite of the cherry, so to speak. And then lost my virginity in my bedroom a couple of weeks later. And I couldn't believe it. It lasted about 10 seconds, yeah? Best 10 seconds of my life up to that point. I remember just pacing up and down the bedroom like, oh my God, that was amazing. And she just lay on the bed giggling away like a fucking idiot. So, right, what's the point of all this? There was something about that whole period, just learning that I could attract women and then losing my virginity and becoming sexually active and having a girlfriend. It just changed me. I remember just all of a sudden, like I couldn't be arsed with the school politics anymore. All the dick swinging and who's the hardest and who's the most popular and the funniest and the best looking. For me, all that was rooted in impressing the girls. But I felt like I didn't need to do that anymore. And I didn't care. I just wanted to play my guitar and hang out with my girlfriend and get laid and stuff. So, yeah, I stopped making the effort. Like I pulled back from it all. Stopped hanging out with people inside and outside school. And I just didn't care. I didn't see the point. I think I sort of realised that most of these so-called friendships I had were more like political alliances. You know, I just wanted to be popular. And the way to become popular was to become acquainted with certain names and faces. But now that I didn't care about being popular anymore, what these people represented, this idealised image that I'd projected onto them, just sort of fell away. And all that was left for me to judge them on was the personalities. And I didn't really like anybody. You know, I didn't have anything in common with any of them. And it was all just fake and a waste of time. Anyway, final thing that happened. During the summer, I'd gone and got my tongue pierced, all part of the wannabe rock star thing. And let me quickly tell you this story. So I went and got my tongue pierced at this place in Stockport Town Centre, Tony's Tattoo Parlour, right? And because I was on my own, I didn't have anything to prove to anybody, so I opted for the anaesthetic spray to numb my tongue. Anyway, I get it pierced, no problem. Then, as I'm walking back through the town centre on the way to the bus stop, I'm thinking, you know, I want people to know how cool I am that I've just had my tongue pierced. So I start playing with a tongue stud in my mouth and I'm sort of sticking it out between my teeth and running it across my lips and what have you to show it off. And it works. Everyone's looking at me. And I mean everyone, yeah, especially the girls. I'm thinking, pussy magnets, this thing. So, get to the bus stop. People are still staring at me. But by this point, I've already stopped showing my tongue stud off. So, what's going on here? So I turn to the reflection in the bus stop window and realise the reason people have been staring at me is I'm drooling spit and blood all down my chin and it's dripping down all over my chest. Because of course, I've just had a big needle through my tongue, yeah, and it was bleeding. But because my mouth was numb, I didn't realise I was basically just slavering blood all over myself in public, looking like something out of The Walking Dead. Fucking idiot. Anyway, when I went back to school, stood in the corridor or whatever, waiting to go into a science lesson, I think it was. And one of the teachers noticed, or I think somebody might have snitched me in, Mr. Rowland, big bastard he was, tall, big bellowing voice. And he confronted me in front of everyone, told me to take it out, started yelling at me, getting in my face. And I think he spat on me a bit while he was shouting. So I saw my ass, told him to fuck off and just walked out. And he sort of chases after me and tries to herd me towards the headmaster's office, but I just walked out the gates and went home. Anyway, so the school refused to allow me to go back with a tongue piercing. I refused to take it out. My poor mum stuck in the middle trying to mediate. And this went on for like months. And I think my mum got a letter from the courts like threatening her with a fine or prosecution or something. And I remember her breaking down in tears at the dinner table. So I was like, right, I give up. But I didn't give up without a fight. Cheeky little shit. I managed to negotiate that I could come back to school with the tongue piercing still in, so long as I got a flesh-coloured stud so you couldn't see it in my mouth. And I also managed to negotiate half my lessons away so that I only had to come in for like 4 lessons, like English, maths, science, and French, I think it was. So I wound up having this half schedule where I'd sometimes only come in the middle of the day, or I'd go in first thing in the morning, do a couple of hours, and then be off home again. But when I finally did go back, even though it was only like a couple of months I was away, that's like a lifetime in teenage years, and I'd missed out on all the drama and the various storylines that had played out in the meantime. So I'm completely out of the loop, and now I'm on this half schedule as well. So I'm not spending as much time with these people, and couple that with the fact that I couldn't be asked making the effort with them anymore anyway. I just sort of fell out of favour, and I wasn't like shunned or anything. I still spoke to people and stuff, but I didn't fit in anymore. But the weird thing was, I loved it. There's something very liberating about not being a part of anything. I'd sort of turned into this lone wolf who didn't have any loyalty to anybody. But it was like the opposite of lonely. I actually loved being by myself in my own head because, it's just me in there. I wasn't constantly trying to keep track of all these different relationships and the politics of who said what about who and who likes me and who doesn't. And yeah, I think for like the first time since becoming a teenager, my mind was at peace with itself and I was at peace with who I was as well. And that was huge for me back then. I don't think I've ever been as content as I was back then since. Anyway, I didn't really bother doing my exams in the end. Didn't see the point. I just went straight to getting a job in a lampshade factory, pulling fabric onto lampshade frames. £2.36 I got paid for that gig. Something like, what would be that, like $3 an hour, something? 90 quid a week. Thought I was fucking Rockefeller, yeah? Up from £15 a week, doing a paper round. Didn't last long. Soon got bored with that job. And then, yeah, that's it for the next few years. I just sort of flitted about from job to job. Carried on playing the guitar. Had designs on being a songwriter for a while. Split up with Lucy after a couple of years. Devastated when that happened. Thought that was it. Never going to meet anyone ever again. But I did. Started seeing a girl called Kirsty. I'd completely abandoned any sort of friendships during this period. Just me living at home with my parents. Hanging out with this new girlfriend. And yeah, not very much happened. I didn't really want much out of life. I wasn't happy. I wasn't unhappy. Just sort of plodding along. Very much the calm before the storm, let's say. Okay, so skip to 2003 and 2021? Couple of things happened there. Somewhere down the line, I'd quit like music and songwriting, but realised that I'd sort of fallen in love with like words and storytelling. So I'd started writing little stories and screenplays and stuff, just for fun really. Secondly, more significantly, I'd begun to regret not making the effort in school. I'd become very curious about the world and I wanted to start learning things. And I'd already started dabbling in fiction and stuff to like help with my writing and stuff, but I wanted to add some non-fiction into the mix as well. Anyway, I read a bit of this and that, and then I somehow stumble across the Autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. And this is the point at which my outlook on life completely changed. And part of me wishes I'd never fucking read that book, right? Until I read that book, I was perfectly happy being nothing, achieving nothing, yeah? So, if you don't know about Malcolm X, here's this kid who has a fucking horrendous childhood. His dad gets murdered by white supremacists. Well, not officially, but likely. His mum winds up in a mental hospital. He's in and out of foster homes. In school, he wants to practice law, but then some cunt teacher comes and tells him it wasn't a realistic goal for a nigger. Yeah? So, gets involved in drugs and guns and prostitution, and then at like 20 years old, he winds up in prison for about 7 years. I think it's for larceny. And anyway, while he's in there, starts to educate himself, sorts himself out, swears off all the bullshit he's been involved in the past, and long story short, guy gets out of prison, changes the political landscape of an entire country. And I just remember thinking, Jesus, like, if he can go from rock bottom to changing the world, surely I can do a little bit of something with my life, And I'd never really even considered that a possibility before. Like, I'd never really bothered with ambition because I felt like I wasn't built for it, But here's this guy, way worse off than me, and made something of himself on a massive scale as well. And it just sort of snatched all my excuses away. So all of a sudden it's like, world's your oyster, motherfucker. What are you going to do with it? And I felt like it was as well. So I've got this screenplay I've been writing. I finish it off, polish it up. A couple of weeks later, I'm on a fucking plane to Hollywood. Nothing but a couple $100 and a screenplay in my backpack. And 21 years old, I'm going to go over there, take Hollywood by storm. Well, didn't do fuck all, did I? Right? It was a disaster. Yeah, ran out of money in about 2 days. Couldn't afford to stay in any of the motels over there. Wound up staying on in a motel on Santa Monica Boulevard, where the guy who owned the place took pity on me and let me stay for cheap in a room there, which was like, had some sort of drainage issues and the carpet was piss wet through. I couldn't get a single studio to read my screenplay because I didn't have an agent. Remember I tried to make up a sob story. Said, I've come from the UK, but I couldn't afford a flight to LA, so I landed in New York and I've had to hitchhike all the way across the country. And the guy on the phone was like, tough shit. Told me to get on a plane back home and go find an agent. So, yeah, my storm in Hollywood consisted of sitting in a motel with mushrooms growing out the carpet for a few days, eating Cheetos and trying to book an early flight home. Pathetic. When I did get home, sent my script off to a bunch of places, didn't get any responses. Finally, like 6 months later, I got one reply off a company telling me they didn't like it. Said, technically, my writing was good, but my characters were underdeveloped. So, of course, I only hear the criticism, see me ass, realise I was completely mistaken about having the potential to achieve anything, chuck my script in the bin, delete everything I've ever written, and then just quit writing, like you do. Anyway, so back down to earth, I get a job in a picture framing shop, sticking the backs on picture frames. That was my job. And it was around about this time that my nana, my mum's mum, started getting sick and had to be cared for at home. So my days were divided between working at this picture framing shop, which was a fucking blast, and caring for my nan on my dinner hour. And we're not talking like make her a brew and a sandwich kind of caring. We're talking bathing and dressing open wounds. And I didn't mind looking after her, but no one was fucking helping. It was just me and my mum. And my nan's had always been like the family hub. Like, you couldn't go around my nan's house without finding somebody else already there. But as soon as she got sick, fucking nothing, like tumbleweeds. And I remember she said to me once, something like, how bleeding ironic that you wind up being the only one that bothers with me. Which, yeah, I don't know, kind of puts paid to the whole blood is thicker than water proverb, I think. But yeah, I just started to feel depressed by the whole situation. I'd failed as a writer, the only ambition I'd ever had. Silly looking back, but that's how I felt at the time. I've got this shitty, monotonous job. My nan's sick. No one's bothering with her. My relationship with my girlfriend was going nowhere. All we ever did was go KFC, watch telly, and have boring vanilla sex once a month. So anyway, one day it's all starting to get on top of me. I'm at work, can't concentrate, I'm making mistakes. And then somebody mentions that one of the lads there was coming up to his 10 years anniversary of being there. And it had been his first job since leaving school. And something about that just fucking wound me up. I remember thinking, I can't fucking do this. I'm not spending 10 years here doing this. So I just put my shit down and walked out. Which wasn't that big of a gesture, to be fair. I'd probably had about 10 or 15 jobs since leaving school at this point and spontaneously quit all of them. But why it mattered more this time was because my parents were having some money troubles at the time. And this was sort of an inconvenient moment to reduce the family income. Anyway, I go home, it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I've got a couple of hours before my mum gets home. And then I'll have to tell her that she's down even more money. So I've got 2 hours to get a job. I get the yellow pages out. Remember them? Yeah? I think, fuck it. A bar job will be nice and easy to get. Plus, girls, booze, music, all that. Bit of excitement. So I'll ring up one after another. No. Pubs, nightclubs, bars, nothing. Can't get nothing. Keep skimming through. There's one last possibility. There's a strip club in Stockport called High Society. So I ring it up. This woman answers. Yeah. So, hiya. Yeah, I was just wondering if you've got any jobs going. She says, have you seen an advert? I says, no, I was just wondering. She says, well, what makes you think we've got any fucking jobs going then? It's like, no, like I say, I was just asking. She says, well, there isn't any. Puts the phone down. Like, Jesus. Well, that's it now. I'm fucked. Yeah, my mum will be home in like 10 minutes. Yeah, I'm thinking about ringing the picture framing guy up and apologising. Then, with moments to spare, like in a movie, phone rings. Yeah, pick it up. She says, are you that fucking idiot who just rang up for a bar job a minute ago? I'm like, yeah. She says, what do you look like? It's like, oh, well, I've shaved head, blue eyes. She says, are you muscly? Muscly? I'm like, not particularly. She says, how tall are you? I was like, 5'7". She goes, oh, for fuck's sake. She goes, are you hard? I'm like, am I hard? She says, do you know how to fight? I said, well, if someone twats me, I'll twat them back. She goes, oh, well, that'll have to fucking do, I suppose. She says, I've got a place in Manchester City Centre. I need a male presence there. She says, you don't need to act like a bouncer or anything. Just take some CDs with you, play some music, pretend like you're the DJ. She says, if the guys are just mouthing off, you keep your mouth shut. Let the girls deal with it. Only if it gets physical, that's when you need to step in. She says, it's £50 a night, 11 till 4. You up for that? Now, here's the thing. Every fibre of my being is saying, no chance. This is fucking proper dodgy. And that's exactly why I was like, fuck yeah, I'm up for that. So, following night, I turned up to the address that she'd given me. It's not a strip club, it's a fucking massage parlour above a takeaway, a brothel, yeah? I press the buzzer, go upstairs, place is crawling with girls walking around in like stockings and suspenders and knee-high boots and tits out and I'm the only guy in there and I don't know where to put myself, right? I can't even remember the first night of being there, and that's probably because I spent the entire night staring down at my feet, just riddled with shyness. And anyway, the girls cottoned onto this pretty quick, and it quickly became a thing to try and torment Danny and embarrass him, like giving me lap dances and getting her tits out and making me touch him and stuff. And fucking, I used to go purple with embarrassment because I couldn't handle it. And the thing was, some of these girls at this place were like goddesses, yeah? It was mostly black girls and girls from like Eastern Europe at this place as well, for whatever reason. No like trafficking or snatch passports or anything like that. I think she was just going for a niche or whatever. Well, I'd never been around black girls before. Like, there was no black girls around where I lived. And so black girls to me were like they were the untouchables. Like, you ain't pulling a black girl. They're out of your league. Well, all of a sudden, I'm surrounded by black girls in kinky outfits. I remember this one girl, Elise, yeah? Dark skin, like dark. And this sort of teardrop-shaped face and feline eyes and just curves and charisma and her voice and the way she dressed and walked and everything. It was ridiculous. Like, it's not evolutionarily possible to be more attractive than Elise was. And at first, being around that is super intimidating. But it was also like exposure therapy because, slowly but surely, I learned to deal with it and start giving a bit back. And then I'm flirting and teasing back and my confidence goes through the roof. Then, a couple of months in, just after Christmas, I found out my missus had cheated on me with a guy she was working with at Burger King. And we'd been together a couple of years at this point. And I'd been faithful as well, even though I was working at this place. But now I was like, screw it, I'm free, who wants some? So I start messing about with pretty much anyone who's up for it, yeah, especially the black girls. And I became a ruthless little shit as well. I remember there was one girl there, right? She had a boyfriend who was like full-on gangster, the real deal, yeah, drug dealer, carried a gun, seen pictures of him like balaclavaed up, surrounded by drugs and money, pointing his gun at the camera. And this is like 10 years before Instagram, he wasn't faking. And he'd drop her off at work and I'd act all like friendly and pally-pally. And then 5 minutes later, after he's gone, I'm upstairs with my head in between her legs, not bothered. So, yeah, safe to say that this place, it changed me very quickly and in all kinds of different ways. So, I mean, it completely eradicated any sense of shyness. I can still be self-conscious about the way I look, but I'm not shy. Like, I don't get embarrassed about anything, really. I don't care. Made me dislike men. And I don't mean that in the usual sort of pathetic, self-hating, male feminist kind of way. I just got this window into the way men behave without the usual social constraints to keep them in check. And they're just disgusting, man. It was like watching a bunch of monkeys sitting in that place. Like, the immaturity, the aggression, the pathetic little temper tantrums. They spoke to the girls like shit. They were cocky. The personal hygiene was disgusting. Some of them were just slimy and desperate. And, some of them would come and try and sit next to me and talk to me. And it's just like, get the fuck away from me. And sort of taught me to step up as well, though. You know, there were times when there's a bunch of guys in there crossing the line and, you know, it's my job to stand up and tell them to shut the fuck up or whatever. Big groups of guys, like, where I risk getting my head kicked in, but, you know, I did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. And made me very distrustful of women. As much as I love those girls, they were some two-faced lying little fuckers and good at it as well. Like, they had boyfriends and husbands back home thinking like they were out waitressing for some corporate events and what have you. And yeah, like girls would be on the phone 1 minute talking like, oh baby, I love you, I miss you, mwah, mwah, mwah. Literally seconds before she's going to go upstairs and get 2 dicks in her for 80 quid. Ruthless. But also on the flip side of that, it also made me see women as just people. And what I mean by that is, a lot of guys put women on a pedestal or think they're like a completely different species. But sitting behind that desk, I got to see women at the most candid and vulnerable, especially when there's no customers in and they get to talking to each other and they forget that I'm there. And yeah, even though it doesn't like strip away the beauty and that sort of hypnotic feminine energy you get from a woman, it does strip away the mystery. Like, women aren't an enigma to me anymore. And yeah, it's sort of bittersweet really, that. What else? Oh, started taking drugs, of course. Coke. Now, yeah, I'd never been a fan of drugs. Like, all the way through like high school, people are smoking weed and like doing trips and experimenting with all sorts. And I was never really into it. Like, I didn't really like being drunk. I didn't like getting stoned. But Coke was, yeah, me and Coke, we fell in love with each other. Let's put it that way. And yeah, that was the beginning of a habit that would last all the way up until my little boy was born. Anyway, so around about this time, my nana dies. So she wound up in hospital, probably because people couldn't be asked helping her and she didn't get the care she needed. And, you know, it was too much for me and my mum to do on our own. And anyway, she's getting better. And then one of the fucking nurses lets her fall in the shower. And she's a mess. Looks like she had the shit kicked out of her. And she's all delirious and screaming. And she only went in with a leg infection. Fucking wound up dying on Mother's Day as well. I remember coming back from the parlour, bought my mum some flowers from the florist, knocked on her door, happy Mother's Day. And she's like, oh, thanks, son. Your nana died last night. How lovely. And yeah, it's also around about this time that my dad started getting unwell. So he'd been diagnosed with a form of muscular dystrophy a few years before. But it was round about now that it properly started to affect him. Like, he started having falls and he'd like bash his face up and stuff. And that was tough to see. And with muscular dystrophy, there's not really any like treatment or cure, so it was only going to get worse. So I just started to become very nihilistic. You know, I'm spending my days around people that have had shitty lives. You know, every day you're seeing and hearing things that are making me lose faith in the world and in people. You know, people are getting STDs, girls are turning up with black eyes, the boyfriends have beat them up, seeing people shoot up, girls covered in bruises where they've hit a vein, people are smoking crack, passing out, foaming at the mouth and puking everywhere. You know, these clients pissing the bed and shitting themselves, and these underage girls working there. You know, I've been to girls' houses where they're living in squalor with like drug shit and pizza boxes and like dirty knickers strewn about, and they've got kids living with them. And, you know, people are fighting and lying and bitching and backstabbing, and just like the amount of cheating that goes on is insane. Like, however prevalent you think infidelity is, trust me, it's way worse than that. And people are so good at lying. And it just made me realise that you can't trust anyone. Like, you think you can, you can't. Right? You think you're the exception, like your relationship is different. It isn't. You ain't immune. You're insane if you think you can trust anyone 100%. And, you know, I've had people say, well, you know, that's just the sort of people that hang around in those environments. It's not everyone. Trust me, it's everyone, yeah? The people who are prostitutes and clients at night, during the daytime, they're just mum and dads and nurses and doctors and office workers and teachers and charity workers and lawyers and supermarket cashiers, you name it. And like I say, it just makes you lose faith in people. But what's fucked is, and this is real bad, I loved it. I didn't love what I saw. I just loved that I saw it. Like, just bearing witness to misery. I think I felt like I was privy to this sort of hyper truth about the world that most people don't get to witness. So it made me sort of feel like especially well equipped to deal with it, like to navigate my way through the world. And that sort of grimy, nihilistic pessimism takes a long time to wash off. Like, put it this way, I believed in like the hopelessness of it all so much. I got the words "fuck life" tattooed across my stomach in great big letters, and I meant it, yeah? And part of the reason I still have that tattoo at 35, I haven't covered it up, I haven't had it lasered off, is there's still a part of me that feels it'd be disingenuous to sort of pretend like I don't believe in that anymore. So anyway, I'm immersed in this environment for like 10 months before I got fired, and pretty much every day I was there all the time. Even when I wasn't working, I just sort of hung out there because I loved it so much. And the reason I got fired was, so the strip club in Stockport and the parlour in Manchester were both called High Society, and then at some point some gang member got shot in the face and killed at the strip club, and it was all over the news. But because both venues had the same name, a lot of people thought it had happened at the parlour. So overnight, the place just went dead. No one wanted to come near it. And it just never really recovered. They tried changing the name, change it to like Angels and give it a makeover. But it just, people weren't having it. It just died a death. So, you need a receptionist to run a brothel and you need girls. But you don't need a DJ or a doorman. So, I got the chop. And one thing that happened though, and I'll never forget this, right? When the owner fired me, the girls decided that they wanted me to carry on working there. So they paid me out of their own pockets to stick around. And but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Like after a couple of weeks, I felt guilty for, what they're doing for that money. And so I just knocked it on the head. But I've never forgot that. First time I felt properly like part of a group that I actually cared about and that cared about me as well. And, still miss some of those fuckers. Anyway, so I move on. I get a job in a posh little wine bar. Two things worth mentioning. Firstly, I'm like 22. I start dating the restaurant manager, Justine. She's a 33-year-old cokehead with 3 kids. Sex is amazing, but she's legitimately batshit crazy. Like all we did was snort coke, get drunk, and smoke weed for about 5 months. And secondly, the guy who owned the wine bar, was a property millionaire, and he looked quite bookish, so I assumed he was either like an intellectual or probably like born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Turned out he was neither. Turns out he actually went to the same school as me. Fucked up all his exams, didn't go to college or university, started out in like dead-end jobs, and then started trying to get his own business going. And I think he said he started something like 11 businesses before he even broke even, and he went bankrupt a couple of times as well. Then when he was like 30, said he finally cracked it and cottoned onto something profitable and then just stuck with it. So of course you hear that sort of story all the time, but there was something about hearing it from this guy that struck a chord with me, and it just sort of reignited the fire in my belly a little bit. But I'm never getting into the property business on a barman's wage. But I'm looking around at this little wine bar and I'm thinking, maybe I could start my own little wine bar and get started in business that way, which I know sounds like very capricious and sort of out of the blue, but I was really good at this bar stuff. I was so good, right, in fact, little boasting moment, that I could sometimes get twice as many tips per shift as the girls were making. Just like gift of the gab and carrying over some of the confidence from the brothel, I think. So I stick around just long enough to learn as much as I can about how this wine bar's run. And I'd sneak into the office and photocopy documents and invoices and like gather all the information about suppliers and wholesalers and what have you, and then I just quit, which doesn't sound a very smart move, but I think I was more still just toying with the idea than seriously pursuing it at this point, because I'm still busy messing about, chasing girls, and like there was a little period there where I knew a guy who could get cheap coke, so I was sort of selling that to friends of friends, thinking I'm a little badass drug dealer, so I wasn't really focused on it. And anyway, so me and Justine are still seeing each other this whole time. Then one night I go round to her house unannounced and caught her cheating on me, which, bit hypocritical considering my own behaviour, but nevertheless, anyway, the guy's car was parked outside and I had some tools and stuff in my car. So I smashed all his windows and poured paint all over his car. And he stood there watching me from her living room window like a gorp. And I would have felt bad about it afterwards, because it turns out he didn't actually know about me. But then he reacted to her cheating on him with me by smashing her face in. And then she went and told everybody that it was me that did it. And everyone believed her as well for a couple of weeks until he did it again. But we had experienced that as well, being accused of that, because nobody believes you. Like, all she had to do was accuse me of it, and that was it. I was guilty. And, oh yeah, I don't know if this was true or whether she was just, like, being spiteful at the time, but she also told me that she'd been pregnant with my kid and that she'd had an abortion because this new boyfriend wouldn't stay with her if she was pregnant. So, anyway, that's it for me. I'm thinking, fuck this. I need more out of life than just this constant bullshit. I'm done with females. I'm done with drama. I just want to do something worthwhile. So, I spent most of 2005 just learning everything I can about pubs and bars and nightclubs and beer and wine, and I put a business plan together, and then I start like going round to all the banks and these like new business trusts trying to get a loan. They're having none of it. They don't like back ventures involving alcohol. So I think because they were just happy to see me excited about something other than drugs and prostitution, my parents agreed to take out a small loan and get me started. So remember the drummer from the band, Chris? Right, well, he's back on the scene now. He's been sort of messed up because his dad had died, and he like started drinking heavily, and he was addicted to codeine, and like he was taking methadone and stuff. So I'm on this little mission now, and he wants to come along for the ride. And I warned him. I said, I won't be able to pay you. You know, you'll get your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but that's about it. And he's like, fine, because he just wanted something to help get him out of his head. So we go searching for properties. Everything in my price range is like the size of a key cutter's shop. And we're looking for months and can't find anything. Anyway, the estate agent contacts me. This former nightclub premises has come on the market in Lee, near Wigan, which is about like 25 miles away. 2 floors, right? Bar, seating area and bandstand on the bottom floor. And then like a separate bar and 2-room dance floor upstairs. Fucking massive, yeah? Maybe like 300-400 person capacity. And it's 250 quid a week. Dirt cheap, right? What's the catch? It's an absolute shithole. That's the catch, yeah? So the previous owner had been evicted for not paying his rent. But before he'd left, he'd absolutely trashed the place. And then there'd been squatters in the meantime. So it's like piss and shit strewed about and like hypodermic needles everywhere. But I'm not bothered. I'm walking around this place and I'm just in awe. I'm inspired by it. And it's in my price range as well. So I'm like, this is the one. I signed the lease, but I've got no money to afford any contractors to come in and do any of the work. So I spend the next 8 months, just me and my mate, doing everything. We cleared all the shit out. We deep cleaned it. We laid new flooring. We painted the walls. We tiled the ceilings. We built the bar, installed toilets, new sinks, new doors, tiling, carpeting, put signs up, fixed the windows, installed tables and seating, and then painted the entire fascia of the building as well. I mean, you name it, yeah? Everything. Even the electrics, right? And if that sounds dodgy, get this. I did such a good job of doing the electrics myself that we got an inspector to come in and check everything, and he signed off on it, said it was spot on. And honestly, to this day, that is one of the proudest achievements of my life. Probably the proudest. Apart from my son getting perfect school reports, which I like to take a bit of credit for. Anyway, I'll stick some photos and stuff up in the show notes so you can like see the before and after and stuff. So, you know, do all the work, we're ready to open. So I contact local newspaper to come and give us a bit of a promo. But of course, newspaper, they need a story and all that. So, yeah, when I told them I was 23, they seemed quite interested in the whole young entrepreneur angle, because I suppose it seemed like quite a precocious endeavour. Anyway, the journalist comes along and I tell him all about me and my mate doing this grand refurbishment all by ourselves, like blood, sweat and tears and all that. And he's like, great, love the story, very inspiring. Anyway, a few days later, like a week before we're due to open, article comes out, front page of the newspaper, headline, needle nightmare, right, in great big letters and a picture of like a smackhead injecting himself in the arm. And the whole article is basically an expose of how this nightclub of mine had once been a drug den full of heroin addicts, right? And one of the things I told this journalist, I said that because we'd done the work ourselves, I estimated that we'd done like 50 grand's worth of refurbishment for about 15 grand. He translated that into saying that there was so much drug paraphernalia in the building that it cost us £50,000 just to clean it all up, right? Opening night, I'm on the door trying to encourage people to come in, try the new bar in town. People are like, fuck off, it's well dodgy in there. People are thinking it's a brothel, a strip club. And remember, I didn't tell the journalist that bit about my past. People are just inferring this from the article. So opening night's a disaster. So we're struggling from the get-go. Then me and my mate have a fallout, right? Because one of the girls I had as bar staff was being lippy with him and he couldn't handle it, wanted me to fire her. And I wasn't going to do that in the middle of a shift. So I told him to handle himself. But he wasn't happy with this, took it personal. And all of a sudden he's demanding money for the work he'd done. And it was never supposed to be about that. I always said to him that if this works out, I'll sort you out. But he wants cash now when I can least afford it, which he didn't get because I didn't have it. So now I'm on my own, right? Make it through Christmas, just. Then 2007, fucking hell. Get this, right? Firstly, I think some companies must have been getting wind of the whole impending financial crisis because my credit with the brewery got cut. 0 notice, no reason given. So the way you do it is they advance you the product, you sell it, pay them back, and then you keep the profit and then just sort of rinse and repeat. Well, now all of a sudden they want cash up front and I ain't got any, so I need a loan. So now I'm in even more debt. Then, a couple of months later, Wetherspoons announced they're opening a pub right round the corner. So for those listeners like in America and stuff, Wetherspoons is basically one of these big franchise operations that can undercut everybody else's prices and basically run you out of town. So now I'm competing with that. And then July 1st, the UK smoking ban comes into force. So you can't smoke in pubs anymore. And what basically happened there for a few months was a lot of people sort of protested against the decision by just not going out at the weekend and drinking at home instead. So now there's even less customers to go around. So, perfect shitstorm. I'm losing money week after week. I'm getting further and further in debt. I'm losing staff. And at this point, for the first time in my life, I'm feeling stressed. And what I mean by that is genuinely stressed. Like, I couldn't switch my mind off. I'm constantly on red alert. I'm worrying about money. I'm going to keep this whole thing afloat. So, I start back on the coke again. But this time, it's not like recreational like it was before. I'm snorting this shit till my fucking nose bleeds sometimes. And then even then I'd carry on or just eat it or smoke it. And but then I'm high a lot, so I need to come down. So I start to dabble in my mate's old trick of popping paracetamol and codeine tablets to try and like come down off the coke and get some sleep. But you fall into a trap with those because they're painkillers. So when you're coming down off them, you get like this brutal withdrawal headache. So then you take more painkillers to quell the headaches. And yeah, at my worst, I was probably taking like between 50 and 25 pills a day. And I'm drinking heavily on top of it. Whiskey and cider, they were my two. And it's probably a few months there where I don't think I was ever not pissed. And just because I was failing and I didn't know what the fuck to do. And like looking back at it, the best thing for me to do would have been to just call it quits. But of course, you know, some of the debts attached to the business were my parents' debts. And I didn't feel like I could just say fuck it and, you know, walk away and leave them in debt. Especially because they were proud of me, you know. And I remember the first time they walked in that place and saw what we'd done. Their faces were a fucking picture. Like they couldn't believe I'd done all this. And I'd never given them a reason to be proud of me before. But their faces that night meant the world to me. And I didn't want to ruin that. So I kept trying to fix it, you know, throwing good money after bad, and I did the opposite of rein it in. I tried to expand. So we hadn't done very much with the upper floor there. I just concentrated on the bar downstairs. So I got to work on refurbishing upstairs to try and turn it into a nightclub. And this time it really was just me. Again, painting, laying the floor, rewiring, hanging mirrors, installing the sound system, all that. I remember one night trying to install the wiring for the sound system. And I'm running it through the loft space. And it's pitch black up there. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. It's deathly quiet. There's no electricity up there, no lighting. All I had was like my phone screen to see what I was doing. I'm working in 3 feet of space, crawling the length and breadth of this loft, which was maybe like half the size of a tennis court. I'm squeezing between these tiny gaps in the beams in pitch black, and I was up there doing that until the fucking sun started showing through the gaps in the roof tiles. And I worked like that for about a month. Yeah, barely slept, getting this nightclub ready for this big comeback. And so opening night, I think we've got this 2-story venue needs staffing now. And there's just me, one other member of staff and a DJ, because I couldn't afford any more than that. I couldn't even afford any doorman. And the plan was she was going to take the old bar downstairs, I'd take the new bar, and we'd just sort of build it back up from there. Anyway, 5 minutes away from opening, this final member of staff should have been there an hour ago. Well, I realise she ain't fucking coming, is she? She's fucked me off. So I'm stood there in this huge nightclub, right, expecting a couple of 100 people to come through the doors, and there's me and a DJ, and I was fucking heartbroken, yeah, because I trusted this person and I thought she had my back. Anyway, luckily for me, about 6 months prior to this, I'd met a girl called Leanne who came swanning into the bar one night with her sister, and she's just about perfect, right? She's one of those where, like in a film, the moment I laid eyes on her, it was like I was in love with her. She's 18 years old. She's got this sort of 1950s pin-up thing going on, all red, like red lipstick, red shoes, red dress, red hair. And yeah, she like starts hanging around the bar a lot, and we start seeing each other, like very casually at first. And, but yeah, we're good friends at this point, but still she doesn't owe me shit. Do you know what I mean? Just 2 kids seeing each other. Anyway, she shows up to the bar, she finds me all flustered and stressed out. And I think she was supposed to be going out with like her mates that night. But instead, she rolled her sleeves up. She said, you take one bar, I'll take the other. And that was that. We somehow made it through to the end of the night. And then she continued to do that for me every night for about 4 or 5 months, just me and her, a 24-year-old lad and an 18-year-old girl running a bar and nightclub by themselves. And it was fucking chaos. There's fighting and drug dealing and underage drinkers. And we just had no control over it. And it just got worse and worse as time went on. Like every night we opened, the place just got more and more run down because people were coming in and just literally smashing the place up. Yeah. And I remember one night, the night I realised it was all over was when a bunch of lads just decided to fucking ransack the bar and steal a load of beer. And there was just nothing we could do to stop them. And I remember that night, I was just like, yeah, that was it for me. I didn't care anymore. Like the best I could hope for now was to just plod along for as long as possible and try and minimise my debts before either like the landlord or the council or the police came and stepped in and put a stop to it. So that's what I did. Plodded on for a few more months. And when I got really desperate for customers, I even resorted to turning it into a fucking topless bar, which, oh, Jesus, look, I love boobs as much as anybody else, right? And I've worked in a brothel. But fuck me, to this day, that makes me cringe. Just because of how tacky it was. And it was so far from what I dreamed that place was going to be. And, yeah. So anyway, summer 2008, almost 2 years to the day since I'd opened the doors, called it quits and went bankrupt. Which, if you include the lease, I went bankrupt to the tune of about £250,000 at 26 years old. And I've never gotten over it. You know, I've still not forgiven myself. 9 years later, I still think about it, still dream about it, still get upset about it. Can't seem to let go of it. It's like my soul is trapped back there because, yeah, what I am now isn't what I was supposed to be. You know, I didn't dream about being this. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. And one of the hardest things to accept is that I made the mistake of believing that if you just work hard enough, I'd be rewarded for it. But the truth is, hard work isn't enough. You also need to make the right decisions. And I didn't. And that's, yeah, tricky to live with. But tried to stay positive. I tried to remind myself of my old boss at the wine bar and how he'd had all these failures before finding success. So, I tried to be like, okay, one down, on to the next one. But yeah, it was disingenuous, That's like I spent the next year coming up with all these ridiculous harebrained business ideas, none of which really went anywhere. So I reverted back to what I knew best. I had a contact who was working as an escort, so she got me a gig as a driver, which is basically dropping girls off at hotels and people's houses and collecting money, that sort of thing. So that was basically back to sniffing coke and 14-hour shifts. And I turned into one of those guys, right, who no matter what the conversation was about, I could always somehow manage to bring it back to the nightclub. I'd always insert an anecdote about my stint as a nightclub owner. So like, every time someone asked what I did for a living, I'd say, I work as a driver, but I used to own a nightclub. Or, if I like meet a new girl at the agency and she's like, oh, how long have you been driving? I'd be like, oh, a couple of months, but I used to own a nightclub before this. Pathetic. And, but then I did come up with an idea. So at one point I'd read somewhere that like with the internet spreading so rapidly, the new way to get rich was to forget about trying to be like the next Facebook or Google. You needed to like aim at a niche, because while a niche in your neighborhood might have a customer base of say, a few dozen people, on the internet with like a global audience, a niche could mean millions of people. So anyway, going back to the brothel days, some of us had this thing where we used to just like get naked and hang out with each other and like we'd smoke and listen to music and stuff. Nothing sexual, it's all above board, just being hedonistic, like a bit of fun. And then in 2005, I'd been on holiday to Lanzarote, where there was a bunch of nudist beaches down the road from the hotel, which were fucking packed, yeah? And then I remember seeing some like documentary on Channel 4 about naturists and stuff. So I'm thinking, maybe there's something in this, like locally niche, but globally popular. So I launched a social network for naturists called Skimbook, which was supposed to sound tongue-in-cheek, but in hindsight, it just sounds creepy. Anyway, sounds ridiculous, yeah? It went fucking apeshit, right? And the reason it went apeshit is because I noticed that the problem with the whole naturist lifestyle is that it's populated by old people, and old people aren't really the optimal target audience for the internet. So I fabricate this bullshit marketing story using a fake name, Carl Maddox, that me and a bunch of student friends had become sick of the fashion and the beauty industry dictating body standards. So we decided to launch this website to meet other young people who just wanted to be naked and learn to accept their bodies. So it was like this young nudist revolution. Well, the press ate this shit up, right? I remember at one point being on shift at the escort agency, sat next to a prostitute in a Travelodge car park at midnight, whilst at the same time doing a live interview on some lunchtime radio show in Australia. And then it got written up in Time magazine, okay? On the website, anyway. I'm not sure if it ever went to print. Again, I'll submit all evidence in the show notes. But then, in like the space of 2 days, it just went crazy. And we had something like 20,000 new members sign up, millions of hits. And then like every couple of days after that, for weeks, just thousands and thousands more. So I'm buzzing. I'm thinking, build it up, sell it on, make a mint. Then guess what, right? About a month into this little run of success, the company that provided the platform that I hosted the social network on changed their policy on nudity and just shut us down. Just like that, gone. Another business dead. And, oh man, I could have been a fucking millionaire off that one if it had played it differently. And then all these fucking crazy naturists start emailing me abuse for losing all the connections that they'd made. And let me tell you something I learned about that crowd from doing that website. People who just like getting the kit off for a bit of fun or to relax or whatever, they're fine. These official card-carrying nudist club naturists, they're like Scientologists, them lot. It's like a cult. Stay away would be my recommendation. What's funny is, as well, still to this day, I see the odd blog article talking about this young nudist revolution, and it's bollocks, because it's just something I made up. Anyway, so that's another opportunity scuppered. Next, I somehow stumble across an advert to do a course in radio presenting at a local radio station. Sign up, do pretty well, get on the course, and get offered a breakfast time radio slot with a comedian called Lewis Big Lou Jones. And it was basically just the two of us dicking about for 3 hours, but we were pretty good. Like, it's very different from your usual breakfast radio stuff. And in fact, I'll include a little segment from it that I've still got. There were much better bits than this, but this is the only one I could dig up. So have a listen to this. I just thought, I know what we could do for maybe a theme of the day that people could contact us on. I got a random friend request on Facebook the other day, right, from a guy who used to go to school with, mentioning no names, but the only thing I remember about him, and from what I've seen on his profile, the only thing he ever achieved was that he invented something pretty good. He invented something
that sounds good already.
Yeah. Oh no, he didn't invent anything like that. Right. He didn't invent anything that's going to make him a millionaire.
Was it like a poo stick, a stick for like sticking in poo or something?
It was more, he invented a concept at school. And his concept was called Bum on Head. Right. Bum on Head. And it was like, you know how you have stuff at school like pylons? Oh, yeah. Like someone falls over, one person gets on, pylon!
Yeah, I remember them.
It was like that, but he invented this thing called Bum on Head. Right. And it's the only thing I can remember. I don't remember anything else about him. I don't remember ever talking to him, really, any kind of interaction, but I just remember that's the Bum on Head guy.
Bum on Head. So presumably if someone's on the floor, he'd stick the bum on their head and go, Bum on Head!
Yeah, but Lewis, it's not quite it's not as casual as a pylon. You see, a pylon is someone's laying on the floor, you pile on there, yeah. you just get on, doesn't matter where on the pile you get. There's no designated spaces. You just pile on. Right. Whereas Bum on Head was very specific. It was very intricate. So there was rules to Bum on Head. So it was. it was. You had to make sure that it was the forehead. The face didn't count.
Right. Had to be. So if your bum was positioned on their forehead.
Yeah,
that's kind of scary to think where all the other bits are.
Because it's like you know at school when you're like hanging about outside the classroom waiting to go in if the teacher was late or something, yeah. And people sort of like sort of squat down, leaning against the wall. Yeah. Well, that was Bum on Head time. Right. He'd walk past you,
reverse, beep, beep,
yeah, beep. Grab the back of your head and place your forehead firmly in the Bankrupt.
I used to do that with the kids like trumping on them and stuff. You know, like you'd get hold of the back of their head and force it to your bum and go.
Right.
Yeah, we used to do that. Yeah.
But you see, this was like I say, Lewis. This was a very intricate thing. It was like, do you ever remember?
You couldn't really do it in the park, could you? With old ladies. I mean, it's fair enough if you do it in the school corridor. But just imagine that. Some old dear sat there feeding the ducks in the park, and all of a sudden, Bum on Head! She's going to go mad.
Well, that was it. That was the other thing. You had to announce it as well.
You had to let everyone know what you're doing. You weren't just like, look at me, I'm a pervert. I mean,
yeah.
There is a reason behind my putting my bum on his head.
So I thought...
What school did you go to, by the way? Was it approved? Was it?
It was in a very unusual school.
Yeah, it sounds it.
But I thought maybe people could email us in about...
yeah, well, that's going to happen.
No, well, I don't know. Maybe.
No, I know what you mean.
People might have heard that and thought, "Oh, I remember this thing that I invented."
Yeah.
Like wet willies and things like that.
Sorry. What's a wet willy? Oh, is that when you put your finger in someone's ear?
Yeah, you lick your finger and put it in someone's ear.
Oh, so, be sure then.
So maybe people could send us an email or something like that. Anything that maybe you was a victim of one of these things at school. Maybe you invented one. Maybe you tried inventing something, but it just never took off. Bum on Head took off. Big time. It was everyone. It was like Bum on Head was the Facebook of its day. That's how people met each other.
I can't wait till management come in at 9 o'clock and go for a brew next door. I'm going to be straight in there, Bum on Head.
That's what. Oh, Lewis, we could start off a Bum on Head revolution.
Bum on Head. Yeah, I think so.
But anyway, any kind of rituals or anything like that, just funny things that you remember from school, drop us an email, studio@wfmradio.com. Anyway, so we did this for like a year and a half, and we had a podcast, and we even made like a couple of brief appearances on the iTunes comedy charts a couple of times. And so I'm starting to think that maybe I've got a future in radio. Then the station starts having financial problems, needs to downsize. So while they were moving to a different building, they moved the studio to like a cleaning closet in a leisure centre. Literally, a little cupboard with a sink and a mop bucket in, yeah? No ventilation. You're sweating your ass off with all the equipment in there, giving off all the heat. Shit's breaking and there's constant technical issues, so we couldn't do a show properly. Sometimes you're not even broadcasting to anybody. And it was only supposed to be for a couple of weeks as well, but it sort of dragged on for months and months with no end in sight. And it just started to weigh on us, and it just sort of, we ran out of steam and it just sort of died a death. So that was another little ray of hope extinguished. Then me and Leanne get pregnant with Roman. He's born in September. Now I'm still working at the agency, but now it's competing with a number of other agencies. So work's dying off. And because Leanne's on maternity leave as well, money ain't great. So we're stuck living with my parents. So we decide between the two of us, it's probably best if Leanne goes back to work and I stay at home and look after Roman, because she's management level with a steady job. So Leanne goes back to work and I'm sat home looking after a baby. I fucking hate it, right? Leanne finds the whole caring, nurturing thing rewarding. I don't care. Call me a 1950s chauvinist pig. I love my son with all my heart, right? And toddlers, when they're like walking, talking and all that stuff, love it. Babies, no. I just found it frustrating and boring and monotonous. And all these progressive type dads who are sort of happy staying at home and having the wife go out to work, all power to you, whatever, but it ain't for me. And I ain't saying women should stay at home and nothing like that. I couldn't give a shit to what you want to do with your time. But for me, I need to be out earning money and pursuing something. And I do not like being taken care of. And I just felt like a fucking deadbeat. And the shitty thing is, we're more traditional in that sense anyway. Like Leanne would have loved to have stayed at home and be a stay-at-home mum and send me off to work. But it just wasn't an option. So I'm looking at this situation. Got my whole family crammed in this tiny house. I've got no money, no job. Leanne's going to work. She feels like she's missing out on seeing Roman grow up. And it's all my fault. Yeah, and I'm all out of ideas on how to fix it. So I just felt trapped and like a fucking failure. And it didn't help that because I'm a dad now, I'd sworn off substance abuse. No booze, no coke, no codeine. But without any of that shit, I started to just get stuck in my own head with no respite from it. And that's the point at which I think I started to become depressed for the first time. And it fucking hit me like a ton of bricks. The only way I can describe it for people who haven't experienced it, it's not like any emotion you feel in normal everyday life. It's not like sadness or just feeling negative. It's not even really like an emotional experience per se. It's more like a feeling of illness. Like, whereas emotion sort of like washes through you, whether it's anger, happiness, love, whatever, emotion sort of courses through your veins. Whereas depression just sort of sits there like a fucking bag of cement. And it's deeper than emotion. It's like it's in your fucking bones, like a sort of necrotic heaviness. Like being infected by some fucking gangrenous poltergeist. It just sort of sits inside you, like wearing your soul like a shawl while it rots to death inside you. And everything looks dark all the time, like you're wearing shades, and you just feel like you can't move, like you're treading water, and oh man, it's rough. And so, yeah, this is where everything begins to snowball. I'm feeling depressed, I'm tired all the time, getting headaches, I'm sluggish, I've got all these sort of aches and pains, and I don't know anything about mental health. So I automatically revert back to assuming that it's down to some sort of physical illness. So I'm back on it with the self-diagnosing. I'm on medical forums, I'm reading about cancer symptoms, I'm body checking my skin, my pulse, are my pupils dilating properly? Is my breathing normal? Is that a wheeze in my chest? Why is my throat dry? I'm lying on my back, pushing into my abdomen, trying to feel for lumps. Sometimes I'm checking so often I'm bruising myself, so then I'm wondering if these bruises mean I've got some sort of blood infection, or I'm irritating my skin, getting a rash, and what does that mean? And this becomes all day, every day. So I go get one of these private health screens to try and narrow it down. And the blood test flags up something to do with my liver. So I go see my doctor, they do a test, say everything's fine. Now looking back, I think the difference might have been that when you get a blood test on the NHS, it tells you if you're in the normal range. And I think this private blood test was to tell me whether I was in the optimal range, which is, important distinction. But of course, I ignore the second result and just take that to mean that the doctors have missed something. And I become convinced that this first reading is an early sign of liver cancer. So then that becomes my thing, and like magic, right? All my other symptoms disappear. And all of a sudden, I'm just getting twinges and cramps in my abdomen. Fucking crazy. Crazy what your mind can do. So I go into overdrive now. And I'm emailing doctors privately. I'm researching whether I could buy some sort of scanner to test myself. I'm on Facebook trying to find people who work in MRI clinics to see if anyone would sneak me in for a backhander. I'm studying the mirror, trying to map where my liver is, drawing the outline of my liver on my skin so I can try and figure out where this tumour might be growing based on where the pain is. And then I start projecting it onto my little boy. I've become convinced that he's got leukemia or he's going to stop breathing in his sleep. So because I was out working nights, I bought a phone with an auto answer function on it, put it on silent and placed it in his cot. So when I was out working at night, I could ring the phone, it'd answer itself silently, and I could check whether he was still breathing. And I'd fucking do that, 10, 15 times a night. Also, my dad's illness is getting worse. He's having more falls and struggling to walk. So my parents have to move into a bungalow because he can't get upstairs anymore. And I started to feel like it was my fault. Now, this is a genetic illness for a start. But also, the type my dad suffers with is incurable. There's no cure, there's no medication, no herbal remedies, no way of slowing it down, nothing. But I started to convince myself that if I'd have made the bar a success and made a lot of money, I'd have been able to find one of these genius doctors in America conducting some new clinical trial and help cure him. Yeah? No evidence of any of this, no evidence of any clinical trial or miracle doctor, just made it up and beat myself up over it. And this goes on for months, yeah? Then, summer 2012, my 30th birthday's bearing down on me. I'd always told myself that by the time I was 30, I needed to have achieved X, Y, and Z. Well, now it's a matter of weeks away and I haven't achieved fuck all, right? And also, I'm going through a period of morbid curiosity watching documentaries about people with terminal illness. And I remember one featured this guy in his 30s with kidney cancer, and he had 3 months left to live, and he'd had a tattoo of his kids on his arm. He said so that he could take a little piece of them with him. And there was something about this guy and his story, the idea of not getting to see your kids grow up. Something snapped in me, I felt it. And I was just suddenly filled with terror, like a fucking waking nightmare. It just washed over me. This honest to God belief that there was every possibility that there really was something wrong with me. And if I really was sick, not only would I not get to see Roman grow up, but he wouldn't even fucking remember me. And when he did grow up and ask about me, there wouldn't be anything good to tell him about me. I hadn't done anything worthwhile or achieved anything. Now, whatever neurochemical stress response I had to that documentary, I spent the next couple of weeks with the most intense period of depersonalization I've ever experienced. So for people who don't know what that is, depersonalization it's sort of like an out-of-body experience we sometimes feel during stressful situations where the world around you just sort of feels artificial, even your own body can feel alien. And it's very much a sensation of your consciousness becoming sort of out of sync or unplugged from your physical body. Very weird, very disconcerting and fucking scary when it goes on for a prolonged period. And the problem with depersonalization is, because it's a side effect of anxiety, if you let the depersonalization make you anxious, you get trapped in a vicious cycle where it fuels itself, because you're depersonalized because you're anxious, and you're anxious because you're depersonalized. So you get trapped in it. But of course, I don't know what depersonalization is. I'm just thinking I'm going fucking insane, maybe it's a brain tumor or something. And I felt like this for maybe 2 weeks straight. And that 2 weeks broke me emotionally. because I really just felt like I was coming apart at the seams. And one night I just broke down, started crying. And I ain't cried since I broke my arm when I was 9 years old. All the shit I'd been through over the years, but this broke me. And I ended up crying in front of Leanne, which is fucking humiliating. And then I went round sobbing to my parents, asking for forgiveness about the bar, even though, you know, they didn't feel there was anything to forgive. And then I went skriking to the doctor as well, like broke down in his office. And his response was to hand me a leaflet to his church. Dead serious, that's what happened. And then a couple of weeks later I turned 30. It was official. You know, I was 30 years old and a fucking loser. So that was depressing. Spent the day outside in the garden building a fence, ignoring everyone. Then in November, I think Leanne must have felt like she'd put up with enough. And to be fair, it's not the job of our loved ones to stick by us no matter what. I know that's not the done thing to say, but it's true. When we're coming apart like that, we take our friends and family with us, like involuntarily. It's like you're tethered to one another. And that is what it is, because you care about each other. But when the person suffering isn't doing anything to try and help themselves, or even worse, if they're like projecting their suffering onto the people around them, that's the point at which our loved ones are perfectly entitled to say, I can't do this anymore. And yeah, I think that's what I was guilty of. And as a result of that, I lost my family. You know, Leanne moved out, took Roman with her, went to go live with her parents. So, of course, I immediately signed back up as a driver for an escort agency. This time a proper tacky one, run by some creepy woman out of a living room. All the girls were like 18 to 21 and all sort of drug addicts and emotionally unstable. And yeah, it weren't great. And I'm back taking drugs again because I'm around it. Then Christmas comes around. Now, let me tell you something. There is no worse feeling in the world than waking up on Christmas morning to an empty house, yeah? Look out the window, see all your neighbours doing the Christmas things, relatives coming round to visit each other. And you're by yourself, and knowing your kids are however many miles away from you, celebrating Christmas without you. I probably shouldn't say this podcast being what it is, but if I'd have fucking hung myself that morning, I'd have felt completely justified in doing so. And I did go pick him up, like take him to my mum's for an hour, but it just felt like I was interrupting everybody else's Christmas. So I dropped him back off with Leanne, and then I went home and snorted coke and watched everybody else celebrate Christmas on Facebook, which was fun. And it's a tricky one to reconcile that, because that whole experience made me realise just how fragile my position is in the family unit as the father. Like, when the relationship breaks down, you lose everything. And I don't mean legally, like, you know, that's a whole separate issue. I mean just being a family. Like, a mother will never have to worry about losing a family. You'd have to be a real cunt of a mother for that to even be a possibility. But for the guy, you know, it doesn't matter how faithful, dedicated you are, you can lose your family at any moment. And even in cases where it's amicable and the mum says you can see the kids whenever you want, that's not the same as waking up to them in the morning and putting them to bed at night and living with them every minute of the day in between. So yeah, it kind of made me realise that, you know, a man can only ever inhabit a family, but it can never really belong to him. You know, women and children belong to each other. So men, by definition, are an accessory. And so, you know, part of what it means to be a man specifically is to willfully invest in your family despite knowing the precariousness of your situation. So even though me and Leanne got back together, ever since then, I've always had one eye on the finish line, so to speak. You know, every single day, part of me is ready to lose my children. And I've got 2 of them now. But I'm always poised for that moment. And I still haven't figured out whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm just jaded. Anyway, so 2013 in a nutshell. Me and Leanne get back together in the new year. I quit the shitty escort agency and the drugs again. I get myself a CT scan as well. Finally check this fucking liver. Of course, there's fuck all wrong with me, but at least it helps clear my head a bit. Anyway, me and Leanne end up having a bit of a shaky year because we got back together without actually fixing anything. So just sort of papering over cracks. Anyway, I get a job at a new agency. This time a big fucking posh one that's run out of a mansion. Proper professional operation. Girls are great, money's good, customers are high quality, no drama, perfect. So at this point, Leanne's still living with her parents. So I've sort of gotten used to not seeing my son every day. But now I've got a decent job with decent pay. And I'm surrounded by opportunity, all these beautiful women. And I'm getting a bit of attention back as well. I think I'd been that stressed out the previous year. I'd lost a shitload of weight, so I was actually looking pretty good for a change. So, yeah, I start to get a bit arrogant because I feel like I finally got some power back. And also I'm not, feeling very optimistic about my family situation. So I started purposefully pulling away from Leanne, like emotionally, physically, financially, you name it. And I think it's both a preemptive strategy and a sort of assertion of independence. Like, I want you to know that I don't need you. If you want to go, then go. I'm not bothered. That sort of thing. So anyway, I had a bit of an awkward Christmas together. Then the following February, I come to find out that some guy down where her parents live has taken a bit of a shine to Leanne and he's trying to get in there with her. Now, call me a dozy cunt, right? But even though we'd split up before, I'd never really considered what happens after that. I'd always just thought of it like we just go our separate ways, but I'd never really thought about Leanne moving on, like finding somebody else and sort of, what that all might entail as far as Roman was concerned. And I mean, it's one thing to not live with your kids, yeah? It's a whole nother thing entirely to think about not living with your kids while another guy is living with your kids. And, it's not just that, right? I think more so, I'd forgotten who Leanne was to me. And let me just say, right, it wasn't all me being a twat. She was being a twat as well, and she knows it, right? But this is the girl that had stuck by me when everyone else had dropped me like a sack of shit. And even more than that, she'd got together with me, not when I was like Mr. Flashy nightclub owner right at the very beginning, but right at the moment when everything was crumbling around me. That's when she hopped on board. She jumped on the Titanic after it had hit the fucking iceberg. And I don't know how many people can say they've got someone like that in their life. So I just realised, what are you fucking doing, you idiot? It's one thing to lose your family because you're falling apart yourself and you can't hold it together. But to lose your family because you purposefully push them away is just fucking stupid. So we did it properly this time. We talked it out, figured out what needed fixing, and we fixed it. And, nearly 4 years later, we've been good ever since. However, not quite the happy ending yet. So, alongside the driving job, just before Christmas, I'd taken on a second day job as a handyman for this rich couple who lived in this big fuck-off house with a massive garden and 7 dogs. And so my routine at the time was I was waking up at 8, I'd take Roman to nursery, I'd go to work all day as a handyman, yeah? I'd come home, sleep for an hour, get Roman from the nursery at 5, Leanne would come and take over at 6, then I'd go out to work for the escort agency until 4 or 5 in the morning. So I'm getting 4 hours sleep a day. And I was doing this for months. And then eventually it started to take its toll on me. I started to just feel anxious and spaced out and tired all the time. And also around about this time, it had been about a year since I'd done any medical tests. So, plenty of time to develop a brain tumour, which would explain all these weird sensations. Of course it would. So I've got some money now, spend £700 on a private MRI scan. Guess what? I get the all clear. But I'm still not feeling right. Like I say, it's not just tiredness, I'm feeling edgy and anxious, which was new to me. So I get a blood test. Again, the all clear. So I don't know what the hell's going on with me. Anyway, one day, I'm out walking the dog up in the hills in the middle of nowhere. And I have a panic attack. Never had a panic attack before. And it wasn't a hurricane force one yet. But it still shook me up, left me feeling very disorientated and that sort of feeling of depersonalization again. But like deeper and more severe than it had been before. But it passed. And then one day, we're having a little family out into Manchester Museum. And again, start to feel really anxious and disorientated, sort of slowly crept up on me the longer we were there. And I just wanted to get the fuck out of there. And I remember on the way back to the car, the depersonalization was getting worse and worse. And this fucking sickness hit me like a fucking freight train. And what I mean by sickness is I felt like there was just like acid coursing through my veins. And I'm sort of tensing up and wincing to the point where I can barely even keep my eyes open. I just feel like my brain and my body is shutting down. It's like it's a 5-minute walk back to the car. I can't get there quick enough, right? Drive home, sort of writhing around in anxiety the entire time. Christ knows I didn't crash the car. And by the time I get home, I just collapse in bed, exhausted. And then I had to sort of sleep it off like a hangover. And then it doesn't happen again for a month. But then it starts to happen a couple of times a month. And then a couple of times a week. And I'm like, what the fuck's going on here? Because all the tests say I'm perfectly fine. So I'm starting to think I'm coming down with schizophrenia or something. So I go to a CBT therapist, get a consultation. She said it sounds like agoraphobia. Now, there's a big debate in clinical psychology circles as to the utility of diagnosis in mental health. For me, it's a fucking disaster because I went from being a person who was having a strange psychological experience to feeling like I'd caught this disease called agoraphobia. And up until this point, I hadn't really made the association between this panicky, ill sensation and going outside because I was still going to work, I was still driving and stuff. And even though I did occasionally feel anxious at work, there was no pattern to it. Well, now all of a sudden, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It starts to happen every time I leave the house. Going to work, the supermarket, even just going to my parents was like being on a fucking roller coaster. And I remember I started to feel tethered to home as well, almost as if being tied to a bungee cord where the further away I travelled from home, the more I could feel the tension in me sort of pulling me back and, I just wanted to turn around and get the fuck out of there. Anyway, I never got a second CBT appointment. I got lost in the system, so if I wanted treatment, I had to go back on a 3-month waiting list. So at this point, it just starts to become my identity. Everything I do revolves around this new illness. I start experimenting with all these bizarre herbal remedies and, trying to grow my own medical strain marijuana because I've read that might fix it. I'm reading books and searching all these different miracle cures and techniques on the internet. I start a mental health support group and I'm just becoming an agoraphobic. Anyway, one day I'm at work doing my handyman thing, right, at this rich couple's house. And part of my job, or the bulk of my job, was 3 times a week, it's my job to scoop up all the dog shit that these 7 dogs had sort of strewn all over the garden, which was fucking humiliating, let me tell you. Which, I don't know why I ever even took that job, to be honest. I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, I remember sometimes I'd be there scooping up all this shit, which would sometimes fill a carrier bag to the brim and snap the fucking handles, it was that heavy. And they'd stand there in the kitchen window watching me. And let me tell you something, that really is a feeling of ultimate failure, let me tell you. To be a 30-odd-year-old father picking up dog shit for a living. Anyway, I remember one day I'm stood there in this garden surrounded by shit. I've got a shit-covered shovel in one hand and a big bag of shit in the other. And this silly bitch who works as a cleaner there comes over, starts talking to me. And I can't remember what she was rabbiting on about, to be honest, careers or something. And right at that moment, she decided to reassure me that if I just keep my mouth shut and my head down, I've got a job for life here. So I'm already thinking about quitting, yeah, because I'm just because I'm feeling anxious all day, every day by this point. But that pushed me over the edge. So I've had enough, I quit. And then with the escorting, I managed to hang on there till about February 2015. And I'd been having panic attacks pretty much every night by this point, but I'd managed to keep them covered up. They were like a 6 on the Richter scale. But then one night, I really lost my shit. I had a full-on 10 on the Richter scale. And it happened in front of one of the most gorgeous-looking girls you've ever seen. Remember Alicia Cuthbert in The Girl Next Door? She looked exactly like that. And it wouldn't have been so bad if she'd have been a bit of a dick. But I actually really got on with this girl like we were mates, which you'd think would make it less awkward. But for me, I don't want the people I'm close to seeing me like that. That's more embarrassing than doing it in front of strangers for me. I don't give a fuck about what strangers think, right? And the fact that she's really attractive just made it all the more emasculating. And she's like 21 as well, and I'm in my 30s having a panic attack in front of her. It was humiliating. So that was the nail in the coffin for that job. So, you know, I've got no job again now, plenty of time on my hands. So then the anxiety really does start to get extreme. So a couple of examples were like, anytime the lights in the house or like the TV screen flickered, I'd fucking sit bolt upright panicking, thinking I'm about to have a stroke or a brain hemorrhage. And and one time I was so tired and spaced out with this depersonalization that I managed to convince myself that I was actually asleep and trapped in a dream, like in Inception, and needed to wake myself up. All sorts of dumb shit like that. So now I'm not just back to square one with no job, no money. I'm on square fucking minus 50. You know, I don't even like leaving the house now. I feel ill and anxious all the time. I'm not sleeping. I'm thinking, there's no way Leanne's going to put up with this shit now. And, you know, I'm going to lose my family again. And what sort of dad am I going to be for Roman? And one of the scariest thoughts was thinking, hang on a minute, I'm like 32, 33. There's every possibility I could live to be 83. I'm only 2-3 years into this bullshit. You're telling me I potentially got another 50 years of this shit ahead of me. Fuck that. So then that's when I start to become intrigued by the idea of suicide. So I start to read about people that have done it. I start to research various methods and stuff. And of all the methods, I become strangely enamoured with the idea of stabbing myself in the throat. Oh, if ever a sentence required an explanation. So how did this come about? So let's just say there's some pretty fucked up websites out there where you can find videos of people killing themselves. And I watched a lot of these videos, but on these same websites, you get other fucked up videos, some of which include beheading videos by, you know, the likes of ISIS and Mexican drug cartels and that sort of thing. And I remember watching these videos, dozens of them, one after another, and they're so graphic that, let's just say, they enable you to locate the most vulnerable part of your anatomy in that region. Yeah? And it was always just over so quick as well. And, you know, a lot of suicide methods are notoriously unreliable. And if you're lucky, it simply doesn't work. And if you're not so lucky, you can do yourself some like serious long-term damage and maybe even make your life 10 times worse than it was before you attempted suicide. So this just seemed like a very pragmatic solution. And yeah, so there was a period of about 2 weeks there where every so often I'd find myself in the kitchen, daring myself to stab myself in the throat with a kitchen knife. And the way I'd do it is, you know how you can like pretend to punch someone but miss? Like you can thrust your fist at someone's face, but we've got the perception to stop like literally millimeters before making contact. You know, and sometimes you can even get so close that you actually make a tiny bit of skin contact. Well, yeah, that's what I'd do with the tip of a kitchen knife, just sort of thrusting it against my throat so I could feel like the tip of the blade sort of pucker the skin on my neck. And I've thought a lot about this since, and I think what was going on was, like, I didn't want to die, yeah? I wanted to get better, but I didn't feel like that was ever going to be possible. So the way I phrase it is, I think I wanted to want to die. But how do you put an end to it if that's not really what you want in your heart of hearts? Like, how do you make the 1% that's had enough overpower the 99% that wants to carry on? And I think my situation sort of speaks to the link between impulsivity and suicide. I think the the idea was, I didn't believe I had the guts to just do it. But I think what I was hoping for was that like some reckless part of me would kick in and make a split-second frenzied decision to just purposefully like stab the knife all the way in. And that, yeah, once that's happened, there's no going back anyway. It'd be like a way for the me now to preempt and checkmate the future me that would inevitably immediately regret doing it and want somebody to come and save me. Because, you know, with that sort of injury, there's no way anyone's going to get to you in time. But, you know, alas, I didn't do it, of course. And believe it or not, that's not the hardest part of my story for me to deal with. The hardest part is what came after, which was monophobia, as it's called, which is a fear of being left alone. After that, I didn't trust myself anymore. Like when Leanne and Roman would like go to her parents for the weekend, I was convinced I was just going to go crazy and fucking kill myself. And I didn't want that. So yeah, when they went away for the weekend, I'd just sedate myself and stay in bed all weekend, just counting the hours until they came back. And for someone like me, who's always prided themselves on being that lone wolf and feeling so at home in my own company and not needing people around me, that's been the hardest thing for me to lose. And I don't think I'll ever feel fully recovered until I get that back. But I'm getting there, you know, nearly 3 years later. I'm in the best place I've been psychologically for a long time. And I suppose, you know, the question that naturally arises from that is, how did I get here? How did I crawl back to normality? Well, you can get fucked if you think I'm going into that right now. This has already gone way over what I intended. So that's what the blog and the YouTube channel are going to be about, I'm afraid, to make this all sound like the world's longest advert. That'll be, yeah, where I do all my chitty-chatting little bits of advice and what have you. So, yeah, that's my story. I've just realised there should probably be some sort of reflective speech here, like a take-home message, but I haven't prepared one and I can't think of one. Don't buy a fucking nightclub and don't take drugs. There you go. See you later. Okay, folks, if you enjoyed this episode, actually, for those of you who didn't enjoy this episode, you guys can bugger off and skip this bit because it doesn't apply to you. But if you did enjoy this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, there are a number of ways you can do so. You could blast out a little mention on social media saying, yeah, check this knobhead out, he's actually pretty good. You could like our Facebook page or leave us a review there, even better. Just search for My Own Worst Enemy on Facebook, I'm sure we'll pop up. You could leave us a positive review on iTunes or Stitcher or whichever podcast service you happen to use. It's always a nice way of encouraging new listeners to give us a whirl. Or, if you're feeling particularly generous and you feel that this podcast is genuinely adding some value and you'd like to support it in a more long-term sense, then you can become a subscriber for as little as £1 a month, or you could just make a one-off donation, again, for as little as £1. So, yeah, if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, just go to myownworstenemy.org/support, but only if you can afford it, and, you know, no donations from stolen credit cards either, please. Can't be arsed with that hassle. So, yeah, plenty of things to keep you busy there while I go busy myself putting the next episode together. So, in the meantime, as I always say, behave yourselves, but not too much, and I'll see you again next time.